Hello there! In today's character profile, I'm going to be talking about one of the world's most popular comic strip characters. Premiering in March of 1951, he has become known for his striped shirt, his slingshot, his penchant for trouble, annoying his neighbor, and his dog who tags along for the adventure. I'm of course talking about Dennis the Menace. However, depending on when you live, you likely thought of two completely different characters. That's because Great Britain and the United States were both coincidentally responsible for comic creation known as Dennis the Menace that debuted on the same week in March of 1951. Who are these menaces anyway? Well, let's look at both of them and see why they're so popular in their respective countries. The UK Dennis the Menace was created by David Law for Beano Comics, a successful publication in England, and instantly became the star of the magazine. If you go on the official Beano website, his face is everywhere, and for good reason. Dennis was a mischievous young boy who went around tormenting everyone from his parents to his teachers to his schoolmate Walter. Usually aided by his trusty slingshot, Dennis made a name for himself by purposely menacing others with gleeful delight. In 1968, Dennis was also given his own dog named Gnasher, who shares the same haircut as his owner and the same penchant for trouble. He also has a particular appetite for biting the rear ends of his adversaries, most notably the postman. In a way, Dennis represented the post-war, anti-establishment youth that was a far cry from their more well-behaved British ancestors. Thus, this was an unusual hero for children and their oldest siblings to look up to, but that played a huge part in his growing popularity. The American Dennis the Menace, on the other hand, was an example of the country's support for core family values, as he tries to help out his family and friends, though things go awry most of the time. Dennis Ketchum was based on the son of the comics creator Hank Ketchum, who also based the parents on himself and his wife Alice. Dennis frequently goes about mostly wanting to hang about with his neighbor George Wilson, who he always greets with a shout of, "Hey, Mr. Wilson!" Even though Dennis thinks he is helping him, he instead annoys Mr. Wilson, who would rather Dennis hang out with children his own age rather than bothering him all day. However, the friendly Dennis does have friends, other than simply Mr. Wilson. The younger Joey is his best friend and looks up to Dennis. Margaret, on the other hand, is the only person to grate on Dennis's nerves, as she tries to make him more of a gentleman. Simply put, Dennis is prone to messes and problems in the neighborhood, but he is not a bad child, and the Menace moniker is more because of the scraps he gets Wilson into. Unlike the British Dennis, who would probably annoy Wilson on purpose. In addition to the comic strips, both of the Dennises appeared in other media throughout the course of their lifetimes. In 1996, the British Dennis the Menace made the leap to television screens with an animated series on the BBC. The show did a great job at transporting Beano's star character to animation, keeping the designs and mischievous behavior that made him so popular on the page. The episodes were funny, mainly because Dennis was still a character you somewhat rooted for, even though he was a big menace, as his name suggested. A series of videos called the Beano All-Stars were also released that continued Dennis's anarchy as he tormented Walter even further. In 2009, a new series called Dennis and Gnasher aired that coincided with the character's new design and toning down of his behavior, and frankly, it's not the same old Dennis. His slingshot is now gone, and it's a surprisingly gentler Dennis, which completely takes away from him being a menace and a troublemaker. Gnasher was not even allowed to bite people anymore, and thus, what the new show is a completely neutered Dennis. There's nothing wrong with changing the character a little for modern times, but there's such a thing as political correctness squeezing out what made him special. Meanwhile, the American Dennis the Menace appeared in plenty more films and shows over the years. In 1959, a live-action sitcom debuted on CBS and was a fairly faithful adaptation of the comic strip. Starring Jay North in the title role, it's your typical 1950s sitcom, but considering the whole point of the character's innocent hijinks that go awry, it's action-appropriate medium for him. In 1986, an animated series produced by Deke Entertainment appeared on the airwaves and helped raise the popularity of the character. The animation medium allowed Dennis to appear in many wild adventures, but his interactions with Mr. Wilson still drove the bulk of the show, as did his comical conversations with Margaret and Joey. Probably the most notable thing about the show was that Mr. Wilson was voiced by the late great comedian Phil Hartman in the first season, and he did an excellent job of making Wilson grumpy, but nonetheless likable. and like in the comic strips, you understand his lack of patience with Dennis, who completely means well. The Disney Channel then released a made-for-television feature called Dennis the Menace Dinosaur Hunter, but his first major blockbuster role came in the 1993 feature produced and written by John Hughes. On hand was the typical slapstick we'd come to expect from Hughes during that era, but it did have the perfect casting of Walter Matthau as Mr. Wilson, really embodying the character in every way, as you truly believe his annoyance with Dennis. Otherwise, it was your typical substandard family comedy in the 1990s, though with a surprisingly dark turn later on when Dennis is kidnapped by a criminal played by Christopher Lloyd. However, it still proved to be a marginal summer hit, furthering Dennis's appeal. A direct-to-video sequel was also released with none of the same actors, and while I'm not a big fan of the first one, Dennis the Menace Strikes Again was terrible, featuring none of the charm and whimsical humor we would expect from the character. A couple of other sequels have also been produced, but I haven't bothered to watch them. So those are the different versions of Dennis the Menace for you. However, despite the similar name and other little things, neither creator actually knew of the other one's existence until much later. Of course, it's also impressive how the strips still run today, but they cannot be more different. The British Dennis takes great joy out of being a menace, while the American Dennis just wants to help out whenever he can and doesn't mean the problems he causes. Now, if you were to ask me which one I prefer, I would have to say the British one. I have a bit of a soft spot for American Dennis, but there's something about the rebel in Beano's creation that makes him a lot funnier and more enjoyable to me, but maybe you'll feel differently. No matter what side of the Atlantic Ocean you live on, Dennis the Menace has been running for 60 years, and I don't think either one will be going away anytime soon. See you next time.